So, Jon Stewart, former host of the legendary Daily Show, came out to have a fascinating commentary on the role and way in which policing occurs in this country. I want to tell you or show you a little quote from it here because I think it's so telling and so interesting here. You can see, but the how isn't as important as the why, which is what we never address. The police are a reflection of a society. They're not a rogue alien organization that came down to torment the black community. They are enforcing segregation. Segregation is legally over, but it never ended. The police are, in some respects, a border patrol, and they patrol the border between the two Americas. We have that so the rest of us don't have to deal with it. Then that situation erupts, and we express our shock and our indignation. But if we don't address the anguish of a people, the pain of being a people who built this country through forced labor, people say, I'm tired of everything being about race. Well, imagine how effing exhausting it is to live that. Chris, I saw this quote. I was reading through this interview from the New York Times, and it's so telling, and it's almost haunting in a way. It's such a haunting thing, and I want to get your take on it because I don't know. It really struck me as quite right. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's very succinct. There's a number of points in there which are all very good points. I think one of the ones that struck me was that, but the how isn't as important as the why, which we never address, right? Where it starts off there, and I think that's important. I think the how is important. We need to limit certain things that are making the police more powerful, like the immunity and all sorts of things that are inappropriately, but he's right in that we need to address the why, which is why do we have this situation? Why is there a situation that appears to be very racist and appears to be very violent towards citizens of our country that don't deserve that kind of behavior, right? So why is this happening? And this is one of the things that I think people are being very careful about with or trying to be aware of, is that we can't just have some bill come out that gets passed, makes a couple of small changes, and then we say, okay, we dealt with the racist and the bad cops, let's move on from that. I think this is why people are throwing out terms that sound scary and are very powerful, like defund the police and stuff like that, because they're talking about we need systematic change. You need to change the system at its core so that you don't have this why still existing there. That's going to cause, say you change the system in a small way, the police can still find a way to take bad actions. You have to have a fundamental change there.
Yeah, and I thought that was just such a good way to make quite clear, to elucidate the difference between sort of systemic reform and the kind of, tactical reforms that we hear coming out from a lot of Democrats right now, framing it as a how versus a why. Because, when you look at the why, it's really troubling. It's really, really troubling. And he's absolutely right to bring up how it is kind of patrolling the border. One of the things I've been thinking about, Chris, when it comes to this is, in many respects, the large suburbs, or I should say the wealthy suburbs in America, already have defunded the police. I was looking at the Fairfax County budget breakdown where I live, and, only like less than 10% of our budget goes to policing. Less than 10%, a very small amount. 50%, well over 50% goes to schools, specifically to public education. And look, Fairfax County for it. Some of the best public school systems in the entire country, and by some metrics, possibly the world. You get what you pay for. And when you look at, for instance, housing assistance, welfare, etc., more funding to that than goes to police funding. So when you look at the budget breakdown of wealthy suburbs in this country, and it's not just Fairfax County, they've already defunded the police. They've already cut police budgets and said, we don't actually need to have strict enforcement. Let's fund things which actually prevent crime from ever rising in the first case, in the first instance. And I think that, recognizing that is really, really shocking. So, when you talk about, defunding the police, it's a lot of these areas that have strict police enforcement saying, actually, we want to have our budgets reflect our values. We want to have our budgets reflect, sending people to good schools, sending people to have the kinds of education that we want them to have food, to have housing, to have healthcare. And I think that's maybe shocking to some people, but I think it might be right.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. Unfortunately, I think it's hard to argue because when you get down to talking about, okay, well then what about the lower income areas with high crime? I feel like there's sides for both sides of the argument to have a bit of a chicken and egg conversation where some people are saying,
Right.
well, yeah, we have to spend more on police because there's more crime, and then the other side is kind of saying, well, maybe that's part of the problem is that we have this stricter enforcement and that leads to more crime. And I think it's one of those situations like we've talked about where people can kind of retreat to the side that they already agree with.
Right. No, that's absolutely right. I mean, it's not like there's like a causal chain going on here, but it does go to show, I think, that, you can have a budget which actually funds things like housing, healthcare, education. You don't have to be in a situation like New York City
Right.
where they spend more money on on police than they do on housing, healthcare, um, food assistance, and a number of other, I forget the exact list of things that, all combined compared to policing, right? You don't have to have a budget like that. You can have
And I
and build
think,
a budget
oh, go ahead.
which reflects education and housing and healthcare as major priorities.
Yeah, and I think it brings up a good point about just how our society in general is structured, which is, if we didn't have this level of inequality throughout our country, then, if people were in a place where they had health care and they had decent wages, then you're not going to get the crime, right? So
Exactly.
we talk about there's more crime in these bad areas. Well, yeah, so let's invest on making areas sustainable and so that people can live good lives, then they're not going to get the crime.
Exactly. You give people opportunities, you give people a path up, you give people a way forward, then then there's not a need for crime, right? Crime is caused. Crime is caused. It's not caused by individuals who are just naturally bad people. It's caused by systems and societies which don't give people opportunities. It's caused by inequality, which keeps people down at the bottom where they don't feel like they can make it. They feel like the only way in which they can provide for themselves and their family is either by some kind of what ends up becoming criminal method, and we're oftentimes criminalizing things that certain kinds of neighborhoods might do, and also by possibly engaging in an activity to escape from themselves and to escape from a really harsh and tough reality. You have to fight inequality in and of itself, because that's how crime emerges, right? We have to actually deal with that. And I
Right.
do think, though, that when we talk about the distinction between the way in which suburb budgets are written and urban budgets are written, it does go to show how there is a patrolling, right? It shows you what police are really for, right? Because there's a sense in which, you go to New York City, you go to a lot of places like that, and there's police basically on every single corner. Whereas in Fairfax County where I live, I mean, yeah, I see police officers when I drive around, and sometimes they're waiting around on like speed traps or whatever, but I never see police officers just like hanging around in my neighborhood. Never. In fact, if that did happen, I guarantee you there would be calls. I guarantee you that those
Hmm.
police officers would be told to leave by, powerful people who live in some of these homes.
Right. Yeah, yeah, you definitely don't see that. It's definitely not the same thing. Not the same kind of presence in those areas. And partly you brought it up. I mean, if these communities are not spending as much on policing, they don't have the police to have on every corner.
Yeah. So I just wanted to kind of bring up that quote for you. Now, was there anything else in that quote which you found particularly interesting or?
So, I mean, the way he closed it was very powerful about, I'm tired of everything being about race. Well, imagine how expletive exhausting it is to live like that. And I think I've seen a number of instances where they're interviewing protesters who are, getting very emotional. People who, people you wouldn't expect to be getting very emotional. And they're talking about the situation. And you can tell this isn't just, they're not just mad about this one time event. They're mad about a lifetime of events that is an ongoing, oppression and stress that you have to deal with this on a daily basis. And that's obvious. You can see that it's genuine in these people talking about their lives and what the problem is.
And then, what we've turned around and done is just outsource. We've outsourced all these, social problems just to the police. So you have a problem,
Yeah.
whether it's mental health, whether it's with, in the case of Rayshard Brooks, maybe drinking and falling asleep in your car. We outsource all of these problems to police officers, to one institution who have this mindset of criminality, who wants to criminalize everything. And you end up in situations where people get trapped down a rabbit hole. they get trapped. And it's really hard to get back up when they have a record, when all of a sudden places don't want to hire you because, oh, look at this one bad thing that you did 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. And it's really, really sad the way in which our society treats people. And again, it does reflect our values. It does reflect our values.
Right. Yeah, and a lot of those values turn into what people are willing to pay for, right? People are not willing to pay for like public mental health, so state hospitals and stuff like that. And I'm not trying to say state hospitals were run perfect, but people don't want to pay for a lot of that stuff. So that a lot of them closed out decades ago. So now people aren't getting help. So now it becomes a police issue, right? So we're willing to pay
Exactly.
the police to do all these kinds of to handle this stuff, but we're not willing to have hospitals available so people can get help before the police get called.
And one of the things that happened in Fairfax County, this was before I got here, but apparently one of the main reasons why all the officers have body cams is because one time ago there was a very wealthy person who got pulled over by the police, and there was a bit of a scuffle. They had a bit of a fight, and the one guy claimed one thing, the police said another, and he made a big, big stink about it, threatened to sue everyone. He was a lawyer, had a lot of money, and represented very powerful clients. And what do you know? Boom, boom, boom. A few months later, every police officer had to wear body cams. So you end up in a situation where you stop and frisk the wrong person, you pull over the wrong person, and suddenly the police
Yeah.
officers have accountability. Suddenly the police officers have accountability, but you do it to the poor people. You do it to patrol the border between the wealthy. You start patrolling the wrong people. It goes to show you. It goes to show you. It really is a question of why. It really is a question of why. We can't just be focused on the how. We have to look at the systemic issues lying underneath. Chris, thanks so much for joining us. Make sure you guys check out his channel over there. It's Political Perspective. He's got some fascinating stuff going up. Hilarious thumbnail on one of his recent videos. You're going to want to go over to his channel, if only to check out the thumbnail. All right, you guys. See you all in the next one.